Hi, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about trade and specialization and why individuals benefit from trading with others and not just doing everything on their own. It really explains why we even have this idea of economics or this study or this course, because without it, there's no reason or point behind creating markets. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what it means to specialize. We'll talk about the difference between what's called comparative and absolute advantage, and we'll learn how to calculate the comparative advantage of one party or another to determine whether or not you should trade with somebody else or not. So we start with the idea of trade, and we ask ourselves, why do we bother to trade? There's lots of reasons. One is that we are limited in what we know how to make. We can't do everything. We don't have the knowledge that other people have or the skills that other people have to do everything that's out there that we want to purchase or to consume or have. Another reason is because trade will enable us to actually consume more goods than we could do if we were to make everything on our own. And basically what we're saying is that trade helps make everybody better off. Some vocabulary terms that you're going to need. One is opportunity cost, which we did last time. It's just the value of the next best alternative you could choose. Absolute advantage, which means who can produce more of something. So if there's two of us trying to produce the same product, whoever can make more in the same amount of time with the same resources would have what we call the absolute advantage. Comparative advantage looks at who has the lower opportunity cost of making something. So two people could be trying to produce the same goods with the same resources. One can make more than the other, but is less efficient at it, and therefore would not necessarily be the right choice to make that good. And we'll see what that means in a little bit. And then there's this idea of the law of comparative advantage, which is basically what I've described. Whoever has the lowest opportunity cost of making a good should make that good and then trade with other people to acquire other things that they want. So let's take a look at an example. Let's look at two countries, England and the United States. Let's pretend that they only make two products. That's it between these two countries. Fish and chips, or if you will, fish and French fries. So if we look at the productivity of England, we can see that they can make 80 fish and 0 chips, or they could do 0 fish and 20 chips, or some combination in between. And this is what we call their production possibilities frontier. And in America, or United States, we could produce 100 fish and no chips, or no fish and 50 chips, or some combination in between. So as we look at these two countries, we say, first off, who has the absolute advantage? Who makes the most of any particular good? When it comes to fish, who has the absolute advantage? United States. We make more than England, 100 fish to 80. And who has the absolute advantage in chips? Again, it's the United States. They make 50, England only makes 20. So one might argue that the United States has no reason at all to trade with England. But as it turns out, that's not true, which is what I told you earlier. Trade makes everyone better off. And this is how it works, because of what we call opportunity cost and because of comparative advantage. When it comes to opportunity cost, we want to know how much do I give up of a particular good in order to make more of another. So in this case, when we're talking about fish, we're talking about giving up a certain number of chips to produce a unit of fish. And that's how to think about it. In fact, it's helpful if you have a table like this to literally write out the units. And so then the opportunity cost of producing chips would be the number of fish per chip that I have to give up. So for England, when they're producing fish, there's a certain number of chips they're giving up. In this case, they're giving up 20 chips. We just take the intercepts when they're straight lines, in order to produce 80 fish. Write that down there. So the opportunity cost for England is basically 1/4 chip for every fish they make. When we look at the opportunity cost of chips for England, again, we just have these units, so we just plug in the numbers. We see here that it's going to be 80 fish per 20 chips. Which leads us to some interesting observations. We notice that the opportunity cost for England of fish is the reciprocal of its opportunity cost for fish. That is, it costs us 1/4 chip per fish for England, but it costs us 4 fish per chip when we're producing chips. So doing the same process for the United States finds that the U.S., when it produces fish, gives up 1/2 chip per fish, which means when they're producing chips, they do the reciprocal, the flip. So they're going to be giving up 2 fish per chip when they specialize in only doing that one good. So the question is, which of these countries should make fish and which of these countries should make chips? Because it turns out that the people who are the most efficient, if they specialize in that good, will enable both sides to produce and consume more than they could on their own. So when we look at fish, we're looking for the lowest opportunity cost. We look for who gives up the least amount of the other good. And we see that England is better at making fish. That is, they lose fewer chips relative to fish than the United States, because 1/4 chip per fish is lower than 1/2 chip. Think of opportunity cost as a price. So in order to get fish, England has to pay in terms of 1/4 fewer chips than before, whereas the U.S. has to pay 1/2 of a chip fewer. So England can produce fish cheaper, and so they should. And then we look at the United States and chips. We see that the U.S. can produce chips at a lower cost because England's going to give up 4 fish. We're only going to give up 2. So the U.S. is more efficient at making chips because they have the lower opportunity cost. So how does this make everybody better off? Well, let's look at some numbers. Without trade, England can have 20 fish and 15 chips. That is one possible combination given their opportunity cost. And the United States could have 50 fish and 25 chips. That's a possible outcome for the United States on their own, which means the total worldwide consumption of fish is 70 and only 40 chips. If they choose to specialize in trade, then England, because of their comparative advantage, will choose to make fish only and no chips. So they'll have 80 fish and no chips. And they don't want 80 fish. They would like to eat some chips as well. But they're going to trade for those chips by using the excess fish that they don't want and making an exchange with the United States. The U.S. will also specialize, so they'll make no fish at all and make 50 chips, which means there's now 80 fish possible to be consumed in the market and 50 chips. So if that's the case, they could conceivably come up with a trade that would leave England consuming 25 fish and 20 chips, and the U.S. could be consuming 55 fish and 30 chips, because that fits within our production possibilities of 80 and 50. And then we find that the English are able to produce more of both, or consume, I should say, consume more of both goods, and the United States can consume more of both goods. So trade enabled both sides to have more of something. And it's all because of the efficiency, all because of the comparative advantage that each country has in the area they chose to specialize in. You'll have opportunity in class to practice some of these skills and develop the ability to identify opportunity cost and be able to identify which party should specialize in the production of which goods in a variety of different examples that you have. See you in class.